Games are such a complicated and diverse form of media. Even though they've existed longer than I have, they're still a relatively new medium. Advances in hardware have made them almost indistinguishable from what they were only a few decades ago, and having new genres pop up all the time makes it feel like we're really still in the early stages of games. The reason for this is, of course, the gameplay. In contrast to more traditional forms of storytelling, the inherently interactive nature of games makes the most important feature the gameplay itself, as much as many games pretend that isn't the case. This gameplay is exactly what makes games so unique, but also fucking insanely complex. Instead of just telling a story with images and words, game developers have to also weave in a reason for you, the player, to actually have an influence on the world in some way. And more importantly, to make that influence and interactivity fun and engaging, which is why every game protagonist is a mass murderer. Game developers have an almost unthinkable amount of decisions to make when it comes to choosing what the gameplay elements of their game are going to be. But the one thing I've been thinking about recently is information, how it is relayed to the player, and how the information you receive affects how it feels to play the game in question. This is a huge one to unpack, but as a bare minimum, for a game to be playable, it needs to give the player a certain amount of information. This information is quite often delivered in the form of a tutorial. Back in the day, controls were printed on the front of an arcade machine. Then they came in the form of a manual inside a box, and more recently, the entire beginning sections of certain games are devoted to teaching you what you need to know before kicking you off the plank into the shark-infested waters of the real game shortly afterwards. For a new player, or a complicated game, this is obviously a huge necessity, but for me personally, I feel like I can usually figure out a game pretty quickly, and most direct tutorials seem almost unnecessary. I much prefer when a game presents itself more subtly, like how Mario standing at the left side of the screen facing to the right teaches you to go right, or how Bloodborne having 30 enemies in one place ready to murder you at any time teaches you to fight enemies one at a time. But what do these two approaches to the presentation of that information make me feel? And how do they make the game feel? More often than not, the first example makes me feel like a tiny child that the game is being a patronizing asshole to, and the second example makes me feel like a total badass that figured it out all for myself. But what I'm really interested in is how the game presents information to us later on, while we're actually playing it, and how the tiniest changes and details can make a game feel completely different. I think that the trickle feed of information is one of the major driving forces that keep people playing a game. You're given a certain amount of information immediately, but then you want to know what happens next, or you want to unlock the cool weapon from the box art, or you want to see what the next fucked up boss looks like. Metroidvania style games are absolute pros at this type of design, and seeing a door you can't open or a ledge you can't get to just yet makes you desperate to get through the game to come back there and see what's on the other side. Open world games could learn a lot from this, and Breath of the Wild does an amazing job of having huge landmarks you can see from miles away that make you desperate to get over there and see what they're all about. I've been playing Metro Exodus recently, and it actually inspired this video with its mechanics. In that game, which is the most ridiculously hard shit I've ever played, you're given nothing but a physical map of the localized but densely packed area which you must fill in completely yourself. There are no waypoints, and the only way to make map markings is to get somewhere high up and manually and individually inspect each point of interest with your binoculars. If you miss one, there's nothing to tell you it's there, and the map markings are just little question marks until you actually go and visit them. Is it a mutant hideout crawling with watchmen where you lose half your ammo for no reason, or a safe house with an awesome weapon? The only way to find out is to go there. The overall feeling I'm left with is a mix of fear and excitement about the new surprises waiting around every corner, and above all, an intense desire to see every single one of them and the secrets that they might have, which other open world games, or just games in general, very rarely instill in me. It's the lack of information and having to acquire all that info by myself in the most involved way possible that keeps driving me forward. Where most open world map markers boil down to a list of chores to be completed with a known, usually crappy reward, Metro Exodus's unknown places are so much more inviting and quite often have major weapon and equipment upgrades hidden within them. As humans, we have an innate curiosity to uncover all the things, and it's this slow tease that keeps our attention the longest and actually makes us want to explore and have fun engaging with the game. If you could see into the future and know the whole game in an instant, you'd almost not want to play anymore. There's a reason the stripper doesn't just take it all off straight away. As an expert on Bloodborne lore, I'm well aware that H.P. Lovecraft said, "The oldest and strongest emotion of mankind is fear, and the oldest and strongest kind of fear is when you don't have a fucking clue what's going on." The example that immediately springs to mind for me is The Fog and Silent Hill. Horror games are scary as shit to begin with, even when you can see the nemesis chasing you down the street. But when that precious information is taken away, the siren starts sounding and you can't see 3 feet in front of your eyes, the fear that an enemy could be absolutely anywhere almost makes you want to physically turn off the game. It's the not knowing that makes it so bad. A lack of information can also give non-horror games that same feeling of uncertainty, in which a much more cautious style of gameplay is needed to succeed. In the Souls games, because your souls are lost on death, when you're travelling through an area, there's always that feeling of desperation, of getting to the next bonfire before you run out of Estus, a feeling that can only exist on a first playthrough. Not knowing the enemy placements or where the next shortcut or boss is, creates such a strong feeling of tension that there's a constant battle in your mind of risk and reward about whether you should go back to the bonfire and level up with the souls you have and have to kill everything from scratch, or push ahead and risk dying and losing everything. Once you've played the game once, or you have someone telling you where everything is, you can just run to the next shortcut when you're low on Capri Sun, and that feeling of tension is completely gone. I did a hoodless Bloodborne playthrough recently, and it cannot be exaggerated how much more stressful the game becomes when you have no idea how much health you have, how much damage you're doing, or how many healing items you have. I'm not sure the game is better when there's no other visual way to tell if an attack took off 30% or 90% of your health, but it certainly makes it more interesting. The Binding of Isaac plays with the information it gives you in ways that can drastically increase the tension like this. For starters, enemies don't have health bars at all, which means you have to play cautiously the entire time you're fighting them. This doesn't seem like that big of a deal, as relatively few games have enemy health bars, but Isaac actually has a little metal spider friend that turns them on, and that extra knowledge allows you to play so much more aggressively. It's one of my favourite items in the game. On top of this, different floors of each run can be randomly cursed, most of which affect the information you previously took for granted and change the game completely. My favourites are the Curse of the Lost, which blocks the map on your HUD, so you have no idea about the size and shape of the room you're about to go in, and more importantly, you have to remember exactly where you've been and where the important rooms are, or risk going insane because you can't find the one room that leads to the boss room. And the Curse of the Blind, which makes it so you can't see what any item does, and therefore can't tell whether it's going to make you win or leave you dead from bombing yourself in the very next room. It essentially ups the stakes for every item, and you have to either give up on a whole floor's worth of loot, or run the risk of getting a piece of shit cursed item that ruins your run completely. Basically, what I'm trying to say here is that even though I've barely scratched the surface of the topic at hand, the type and style of information games present to players can completely change how a game feels to play. Whether it's making a game fun to explore, scary as shit, or infuriatingly stressful, the information a game doesn't give you is just as important and purposeful as the information it does. Thank you to 4A Games for making the second fun open world. Thank you to the PS1 for needing fog to cover up its awful render distance. And thank you for watching. Peace.